Okay, Brett Hurt, thank you for being here today. As we're experimenting with how to do business differently and connect with folks and stay relevant on what's happening, this is a part of a series of Zoom interviews with leaders all across the country that are being projected live onto Facebook. And then later on, we'll move it over onto LinkedIn. So a lot of technology, a lot of APIs, but it's a real thrill to have you here as a friend, as someone who is a respected member of the community. You've been there, done that. And for folks who are just now tuning into this Facebook Live, if you don't know Brett Hurt, his biography is about as long as most encyclopedias, but I'll summarize my favorite parts of it. First of all, he's a great father and he's a great husband. He's a 6-time serial entrepreneur. He's a member of the Austin business community and involved in more things than you could possibly read in a minute. But if you go into his bio, I've linked to it below on this Facebook Live. You can check out more about him, what he does, his foundation. But with that, Brett Hurt, I want to welcome you to this afternoon 30-minute discussion on COVID, the future, and what we're going to do about it. So, Brett, if you just want to give the kind of the quick background of how you got to now. I know you have a huge bio, but for people who are tuning in of all different backgrounds themselves, kind of help them figure out how you got to now.
Well, thanks, Joseph. And, I respect you a lot, and right back at you as leader here in Austin and at West Point and the various, businesses that you've started before. So it's a real pleasure to be on live with you, and hopefully people find some value in this. I mean, one thing I'd just like to take stock of is with all of the crisis going on, both economic and, very real virus crisis globally, it is kind of cool that we're doing more of these intimate, in our home type events. I mean, I'm in my home, you're in your home. People are watching this primarily from their homes, although there's other people probably watching it, maybe from work on a cell phone for those that are in essential jobs. But it's really cool to be able to do these types of things. And I've been tuning into a lot of these as well for people that I really admire and want to learn from. Well, in terms of
and that's kind of neat. And I just want to highlight that point. This instant access, I feel like I've talked to some of my favorite thought leaders and heard them talking more in the last 7 days than perhaps in the last 7 weeks. So I just want to say I agree with you completely.
Yeah, I mean, crises bring out either the best in people or the worst in people, and I guess it depends on what day, right? But I like to look at this as bringing out some of the best in people. And I really believe that this is going to pull us together more as a country. Doesn't mean that there's not a massive shock underway or massive debates about what we should be doing. And a lot of those are very focused on data, which I'll get into. So, so I've been a longtime entrepreneur. I'm actually an Austin native. I was born and raised here. I was very lucky to grow up with a mom who realized that I had an obsession for electronics, and she bought me my first computer.
And what was that first computer, by the way?
It was an Atari 2600, and it had the basic cartridge that plugged in the cartridge port.
Yeah,
and then
I was an IBM
port.
PC Junior guy.
Okay, well, that was a little bit later than this one. This was 1979.
Yeah,
and it had to plug in, keypads to the joystick ports. And I just, she got me that to learn how to program with me because she thought I'd be interested in it. And then I just did that nonstop from age 7 to like 21, over 40 hours a week. And the amazing thing about my mom is that she kept everybody else out of my way. What I mean by that is like extended family would literally say at Thanksgiving and other, times where we got together, things like, he's wasting his life. That's all he knows.
What's he doing on that video machine? What's he doing on that calculator?
Right. Yeah. And it was Texas, football's a bit of a religion, and people in my family thought I was wasting my life. My mom, however, knew better, believed in me, knew I had found my passion, knew that even if it didn't make me any money, that it was what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And my dad was the same way, just in a different field. He invented physical objects. But, when I was 10, I invented one of the first BBS systems. When I was 18, I invented one of the first internet games. And that all turned out to be a real good basis for how the world was going to evolve. Now, I didn't know that growing up. I mean, who
Right.
would have known that? But I'm a 6-time, serial entrepreneur, always with internet focused businesses, mostly software as a service. And then I've been very lucky to be financially fortunate. When my wife and I got married, I had $1,000 and she had $2,000, and we were like, woohoo, we're rich. We've got $3,000. Think about how much ramen noodle that would buy us. And I kid you not,
I remember
that's
distinctly
really
going from being a second lieutenant to a first lieutenant. We were rich. If we could just make it to captain in the Army, then we would never have another financial worry ever again.
Yeah. Right, exactly. And so, fortunately, things worked out really well with Core Metrics and Bizarre Voice. And now we're on a really exciting ride at Data.World. This is my 6th venture. And Data.World, this is a pretty historic day for Data.World for several reasons. One, I just emceed the largest virtual event we've ever done in our company's history. I did that from 10:30 to 12:30 today.
And this is a webinar you did for everybody?
Yeah, this was a virtual event where we had customers like the Associated Press on there, Wunderman Thompson Data, which is part of WPP, the big ad, global ad conglomerate. Yeah. We had different presentations from different members of the team. It was really cool. There were people attending from Brazil, from Jordan, from Kenya, and literally just all over the world.
Yeah.
And it was pretty exciting. It was recorded and it's available for playback for anybody that wants that, but it's a really historic day for us. And of course, we're all broadcasting it from home, including from our customers, right?
Well, send me that link and I'll include it in below here. But you bring up a great point, and we're going to get to Data.World here before the end of the interview, because I want to go into a little bit more depth and talk about the latest bailout package or stimulus package and how it's data informed. But let's go back for just a second, because the conversation is about COVID and going forward in the future. But this is not your first rodeo. You have been around most recently when the Great Recession hit companies. Before that, it was 9/11, and before that, it was the .com bust. So what are the parallels that you see going on now with COVID, or maybe brand new non-parallels that you would see that's never been seen before, that you might apply to listeners or viewers who want to understand some of that historical perspective and how they, as business leaders, either in tech, small business, or in a smaller company or a larger company, might learn from?
Yeah, it's a really big question. I mean, so I've been an entrepreneur since I was 24. I'm 48 now. And it was really hard going through the .com bust at Core Metrics, because at one point we had 100 customers kind of right out of the gates. Like, we were a 1-year-old company. We had this cowbell in the office in San Francisco. I lived in San Francisco at the time. We were always ringing that every time a customer came in. It was like all the things you see on the show Silicon Valley. I felt like Richard.
I won't ask which character you were, but we'll save that for later.
I already told you. I said I was Richard. I felt like I wanted to
excuse me. Yeah.
In the trash can all the time. Whenever I watch that show, my wife is just like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can watch this because we've lived this, She's like, you were him. But it was pretty incredible time. And we just felt like this euphoria of building a company. We got an offer a year into it for this company wanted to buy us for $100 million. I owned 70% of the company when they made that offer. And then the .com bust occurred and we went from 100 clients to 3. I had to let go of 2/3 of the team. My stock got pancaked, I mean, I ultimately ended up owning a good amount of stock, and we survived that barely. There were several times where I didn't know if we were going to make payroll, and eventually we sold the company for $300 million. But it was absolutely horrific, from a .com perspective. And
but can I just take a takeaway? What I'm hearing as a takeaway, though, for CEOs that are scared right now, or CEOs that are worried, who still have to project a positive attitude, is that there is still a very real possibility that while there will be a dip for almost everyone, there still will be a climb for most companies that figure out how to be adaptable and agile. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's always opportunity. There's some businesses that aren't as fortunate as Data.World in this environment. Data.World's seen unprecedented growth in our data community on public data sets like on the coronavirus and things surrounding the coronavirus. We're seeing historic growth in our customer base as customers rally around coronavirus data sets and the impact around it. So that feels very fortunate. But I have lots of brothers and sisters who own restaurants, who own salons, who own lawn care businesses, who own travel businesses, who are absolutely hurting right now. And it really pains my heart to see. It's very, very hard to see. And it takes me back to that time, which, look, most people weren't impacted in the dot-com crash, but I would say that a lot of people were impacted in 9/11.
Yeah.
9/11 happened shortly after the dot-com crash, and that was the 1-2 punch for core metrics. And that was a time where we didn't even know, if the world was ever going to be the same. And obviously, the world changed forever after 9/11. There's so many policies, so many stances we've had militarily, et cetera, that changed forever as a result of 9/11. Yeah. Bazaar Voice was super, super lucky from a timing perspective. We started with what would become the world's largest social commerce company. We really pioneered that concept of customer reviews. When we started in 2005, only 3 retailers in the entire United States had customer reviews. That's now ubiquitous across the world. Bazaar Voice is in 40 international languages. When we started Bazaar Voice in 2005, and Brant Barden and I, he was a terrific co-founder, there were, Facebook was closed to the public. It was only available to a handful of universities. Twitter didn't exist. There's no such thing as Snapchat. iPhone didn't come out till 2007, which dramatically accelerated social media interactions because it was the first real smartphone. Everybody was using kind of Blackberries, and you remember those flip phones, StarTACs from Motorola. Before that, that's what I had. I had a Blackberry too. And that company just absolutely hit the timing right, because we had this wave of social media coming that would make all the Fortune 500s pay attention. When we started Bazaar Voice, everybody was terrified of customer reviews, though. They said, I'm not going to put negative and positive reviews on my site. You got to be crazy. I'll get stuck with all this inventory coming in from China. It'll just sit in a warehouse as people bash my products, et cetera. And I would say, well, don't you think your customers engage in word of mouth all the time as it is?
And they're doing it anyway.
Do you control that?
Yeah.
Don't you think that the returns rate in your stores on different brands is happening because customers are talking to each other about how they like or don't like their products and they're experiencing those? Wouldn't you want to know? And so we were eventually able to break through that, but it was really Facebook's growth and Twitter's growth and everything else which fueled Bazaar Voice, and great execution by a great team.
So
but at Bazaar Voice, we went through the Great Recession, and with the Great Recession, I was terrified as a leader. I thought, I have no idea if all these companies that we've labored so hard to win and help are even going to be in business. Like, we may be looking at, Lehman Brothers went out of business. We may be looking at, another Great Depression here.
Right.
And
ironically, that was March of 2008. And here we sit in March of 2020.
Exactly. Yep. 12 years later. And so here we are. And what's different this time? Several things are different this time. One, it's a global panic. It's people globally prioritizing lives over commerce.
Yeah.
And I get that. And it's very hard to argue against.
And one thing to expand on that you highlighted that I just want to make sure the viewers appreciate, which is the .com boom affected mostly those in the technology industry and those investors affected. The 9/11 impacted initially everyone, but the residual effect was mostly in the military community, the less than 1% of Americans who served directly.
Right.
The Great Recession impacted a lot of people, especially when it was in the housing sector or in the financial sector. But your highlight, though, here about COVID is it's impacting everybody, absolutely everybody simultaneously.
It really is impacting everybody. I mean, we are investors in startups. We're investors in 80 startups and 23 VC funds. So we get to
and that's
see
with your foundation.
Yeah, and it's actually, we call it Hurt Family Investments. So we do philanthropy out of there, but we also do our startup investments out of there. And we have some companies, it's rare in this environment, that are having the best weeks they've ever had in the company. We have one company that literally in 2 weeks made their entire quarter goal.
Wow.
And it's because they focused on the opportunity. They have a solution that actually helps more in this type of environment. It wasn't focused on the coronavirus, it was focused on emergencies. And they focused their messaging on that and just absolutely beat their goals. And that's something that I've been really saying to leaders and to startups is, hey, get out of the bunker. Don't be so afraid. I know it's hard, but you could be looking at this as one of your biggest times for opportunity. And I've been driving my own team at Data.World to say, hey, we need to focus our messaging here on how we can help. We know that we're having unprecedented growth in our customers as they focus on coronavirus data sets and they're scared and they focus on what is this going to mean for their business, and data collaboration has become more important than ever before.
Well, so let's bring that up. For those that don't know Data.World and what you all have been able to pull together in such a short period of time in just the last 3 to 4 years is already, like you say, groups like the Associated Press and other huge names. In fact, you all were just featured in TDNet about your role in helping, and helping spread the information of what's going on. Oh, it said ZDNet, right?
ZDNet.
Yeah, I said TD. Yeah. Thank you. I'll put a link to that down below. But this idea that we're sharing information on a global scale and in real time, by the way, if we're using the right data sets. So want to explain just a little bit more of what you all are doing and others that might be watching this or follow it later, how they can tap into what Data.World does?
Sure. So there's two sides of Data.World's business, and we're a proud B Corporation. We've actually been named in the top 10% of all B corporations for 3 years in a row globally. One side of it is an open data platform that is analogous to GitHub and how GitHub does that for code. We do that for data. There are more people on Data.World collaborating on open data sets than anywhere else in the world.
Fabulous.
And as you can imagine, they have been really collaborating when it comes to coronavirus data sets out in the open to try to help. And I'm sure that many of them are also collaborating. Many of our community members also collaborating in private. I'm actually not able to see that. Nobody is able to see that in the company because when someone's collaborating in private, it is encrypted, including to our own employees. Just
for
like
a good reason
Slack,
most of the time.
Right. I mean, just like Slack is encrypted to Slack employees. Like, we run our business on Slack at Data.World, as well as on our own platform when it comes to collaborating on data. And, it's not like Slack can see what's happening in our conversations. And so it's been a historic level of growth there. We've been putting out and compiling a lot of data sets. I do know that there's customers, though, that are collaborating in private and having unprecedented growth because we've been able to see their engagement growth. We can't see what they're doing, but they've been telling us it's around the coronavirus data set. So one of the largest consulting firms in the world is one of our customers, and their Fortune 500 customers are really concerned, and they've been doing all types of analysis on coronavirus impact on their businesses and really helping them from a strategy standpoint. Another one of our customers who I can publicly speak about is the Associated Press. They were actually on this virtual event I just did, the largest virtual event we've done in our company's history. It's 2 hours long. And it was so well attended that Zoom couldn't even keep up with it, which is kind of amazing. I'm dead serious. And we had to it was crazy because people were emailing Zoom support and trying to get Zoom,
like speed it up, feed the gerbils, go faster.
We're just getting crushed with it, but it's there for recording, and most people had a great experience with it.
Yeah.
The Associated Press has been front and center to say, what is the canonical trusted data around what are the actual infection rates in countries? What are the actual death rates in countries? How did this actually spread? So a lot of the articles that you've been reading, you would have no idea data.world's behind, but it's Associated Press using our platform in private and collaborating on people like the Washington Post, the New York Times, USA Today, and pushing out really trusted data about what's actually happening that's been highly curated by the Associated Press. And it's driving a ton of the articles that you've been reading.
And in many ways, it's driving the political discourse. So we only have just 2-3 minutes left. So let's spend this minute. We want, in the pre-call, when you and I were talking before we went live, we were talking about the $2 trillion aid package and just how big is the U.S. economy? How are we measuring goods and services that are being displaced during this economic and healthcare crisis? So what role do you think data plays in this? How can decision makers be better informed? Do you want to give an opinion on, are we doing this right? Are we off the mark? Do we need to adjust? What are your thoughts here as a kind of a final thought before we end?
So what I would say is, our nation is 23.3 trillion in debt. And I sent you a link to that debt calculator.
Yeah, I'll put that in the comments below.
We're spending a historic level of trillions on the bottom line for new programs like the $2 trillion stimulus bill that was just passed, which Wall Street seems to like for the last 2 days. Yesterday, as you know, was the biggest rise in the stock market since 1933, although we're still way, way down from the 29,000 Dow highs. Yeah. And we're also spending a historic level, or we will incur expense at a historic level on the bottom line because corporate revenue is going down, which drives jobs and drives the ability for people to pay taxes. And if you have revenue going down, then and income going down, then you have less to the bottom line. So my guess is that we're going to come out of this another 4 or 5 trillion in debt. So to go up from 23 trillion to 27 trillion. And it is all about data right now. I mean, it's all about data. Because lawmakers and even our mayor here in Austin, who's a very good friend of mine, Steve Adler, they're trying to figure out what to do. And they're trying to figure out with very limited data because we are woefully underfunded in this country. It's an embarrassment to me in this country that we don't have testing at a massive level like South Korea and China and Taiwan have. That's an absolute embarrassment. We're the richest country in the history of the world. We'd make the Romans blush in terms of how the access we have to food and everything else here. And here we are, and we can't even get tests in people's hands. That's a national and international embarrassment. And, obviously from a data perspective, are we going to go the way of Italy where we overwhelm the healthcare system? We're doing our part as a family. We're staying at home. We have all of our employees working from home. We were very on the front end of that curve. But what's not going to work is a messy middle. And the messy middle is, look, we either need to shut everything down and starve this thing out. But I've got some friends on Facebook, and I've been very active on Facebook in this time because I've been trying to get to the truth. And I like to think out loud on Facebook.
Yeah. And by the way, you're doing a real service today to help a lot of people, because even when we write it in Facebook, it doesn't have the same impact of hearing you tell it, hearing you tell the story. So I want to thank you again for coming on. But anyway, I cut you off.
Yeah.
So finish that.
Yeah. So, I mean, so on Facebook, the latest debate that people are having, and it's very civil. Like I like the fact that at least on my feed, people engage civilly, is, do we just shut the whole nation down? Well, here's the problem with thinking about that. Let's say that we shut this nation down for 3 to 5 weeks. And I mean, shut it down where literally nobody goes outside except for if they're in their backyard, stuff like that. And we just starve this virus out. Yeah. Well, if the whole world doesn't do that in concert with us, then do we close all borders until the rest of the world complies with that? Because the moment someone else comes in from the next Wuhan, now all of a sudden we've got to shut it down again. So that's the problem, is that we need the whole world acting in concert. It almost reminds me of that movie Arrival, where it's like the aliens got us to work together, and we need to either work together, as a world and shut down the entire world for, a couple of weeks and starve this thing out, or we've got to figure a path out. My biggest hope is that we're going to find a set of drugs that allow us to go about our lives realizing that most of us will maybe get this thing and there'll be varying levels of severity. But when the severity is there, or from a personal standpoint, we can take these drugs and it's like the Tamiflu of our generation,
Right.
until we can bridge to the vaccine, which is going to take 12 to 18 months. But literally what just happened in Congress and the Senate and with the president is we passed the largest bailout in American history, and we have no idea what the infection rate is because we don't have the test. That is a data-driven problem. And if data was ever important, boy, is it important right now.
What a perfect note to end on, Brett. Speaking of data. So I will post all the links that we talked about in this feed, and I'm also going to move it over on LinkedIn. We'll keep the conversation going. I want to thank you because, again, when people get to hear it directly from you and your concerns and your optimism and your challenges that you see on the roadmap, go ahead. It's always much more powerful. I hope that the viewers that are here stay connected. And then, Brett, I'll make sure to connect.
Let me wrap it up, Joseph, with just a couple of things.
What's that?
So,
yeah.
One is, I would say, we will get past this. We always do. 9/11 passed, the dot-com crash passed, the Great Recession passed. And I do think that the way we're globally connected from a capitalist standpoint means that cycles tend to be much more dramatic on the downside, and they tend to be much more dramatic on the upside. I'm not predicting we're going to go back up to Dow 29,000 after this anytime soon. But I would predict that we're going to have a pretty swift bounce once we get to the point where we've got drugs that make this manageable until we bridge to a vaccine. Or, of course, we have a vaccine and we truly can get beyond this. That's number one. Number two is, for anybody watching this, if you're a leader, this is a time where you should be leaning in as a leader like never before. You should be communicating constantly to your team. I'm sending daily messages at data.world. I'm doing a ton of things via video conference with our team members. This is a time for you to lead, not for you to go in the bunker and be afraid. As hard as that is, if you're a first-time entrepreneur, it's very natural to think that way. I've been there. I've experienced that at Core Metrics. I'll never do it again. Go out there and lead, and communicate like crazy. My CEO coach, Kirk Dando, always tells me, if you're not communicating to the point where you think you're dramatically over communicating, you're under communicating. And that is more true in this environment than ever before.
That is the perfect note to end on. Brett Hurt, thank you for spending your time with us here today, talking about COVID in the future. And I look forward to staying connected, everybody. Take care.
You bet.
See you later. Thanks, Brett.